What we need to do today is to encourage the democratizing movements and those voices that are reimagining what it means to be a good, completely kosher, to kind of mix a metaphor, Muslim, and see engagement in the world in a way which is not typical of the old empire's way of doing business. Yes, there was another question or comment.
I don't really have a question. I just find this kind of a discussion really disturbing to me, because I really feel that there's a universal truth in our world, and that is of kindness, and as Father says, humility and love, and doing the right thing, as you read in these first three readings, you know, on the front page. And it is mind-boggling to me that man, and I mean men and women, I don't mean any sex, don't get it. I find it so incredibly sad that all these things that you've been talking about have taken place and are going to continue to take place. And for what? I'm just making a statement.
Right. I'm totally with you. I am with you.
It's very disturbing.
So when I was a young kid and I was living in a communal farm in Israel, and I lived there for a couple of years, and I was very frustrated because I felt that the community was really not positive. It was a negative community. These are people who were survivors and people who had come from Eastern Europe, and they were down on everything. And there were a few of us who had a different background and were very excited about making the world a better place and changing and being engaged, and there was all this weight in the middle, and there were some real problematic individuals that was just bad about everything. And I expressed my frustration to the kibbutz secretary, who was the elected head of the kibbutz. They call it the secretary because it came out of the socialist movements where they're secretaries. And he said to me something that I have really lived by ever since. It's a profound wisdom which is so simple. He said, you know, think of this kibbutz, which is one communal farm, right? A community where you're living really on top of one another. Think of the kibbutz as a mass, just kind of a massive weight. And there are some people who are really negative. And they're going to pull that mass that is just sort of sitting there in the middle in the negative direction, to the negative equation. So you need to be on the opposite side, and you need to be pulling and dragging them to the positive. And then he started thinking about it, and he said, you know, that's sort of like the world. The world is a big weight of people who are sort of waiting and not doing much. And there's some very negative people in this world that are having an influence, a very bad influence, violence, resolving issues in ways that are not acceptable. And they're pulling all of those, that dead weight in the middle to the negative equation. And so we should all work really hard to engage in the positive and to pull that dead weight in the positive. And we're not going to resolve it. This is what's frustrating. And I personally have come to terms with that. I think that's our job. The world, there will be maybe redemption someday, though in my religious tradition, we're not expecting it so clearly. It's sort of one of these vague, maybe type of views. So we have to make sure that the world moves in the positive equation. We can't wait. And so I'm happy that you're upset about it. Not because of your own personal sense of, you know, happiness, but because you will become, or you are already, part of that positive equation.
We have one more question.
Yes. Okay, so let's take two, and then I'll try to respond to them, or maybe I won't. Yes, one, and then in the back, okay?
Although you can't prove the validity of God and the existence of God, doesn't each religion depend upon revelation, a revelation from God? And in doing so, they limit it to their own communities. And as a result, the Catholic Church is carried to the extreme with this papal infallibility. And you've seen the Mormons copy that too, where they get inspiration every time they want to change the rules. And that is one of the major impediments to bringing religions together.
Right. Well, we've resolved that problem. that is, my colleague and friend Jim has written the definitive article on papal infallibility in that collection that you will see, and I'm sure you will pick up a copy of. Yes. Okay, so that gives me an opportunity, another opportunity. Here's something interesting. This is another one of these accidents of history. Israelite religion, or Judaism, was the first monotheistic religion to be successful. There's evidence that there were other forms of monotheism before, but they didn't hang on, they died out. And the entire world, at least known to that part of the world, were one form or another of polytheism. It seemed like the Jews or the Israelites were the only monotheists. And there was one God, there was one revelation of monotheism. It made sense that they owned it, right? A new religion emerges into history called Christianity. Now, there was some question as to whether the Christians were Jews and Jews were Christians and Jesus was Jewish and all that, and Jesus was Messiah or not Messiah. So it was kind of an emerging out of the Jewish community to a certain extent, but pretty soon on there was a parting of the ways, they call it, and there were two separate communities. There's one God. Why would God give two different revelations to two different communities? Because God forgot? That's sort of an impossibility if God is omniscient. Because God was playing with people's minds? Wouldn't make sense if God is good. These are assumptions that are associated with God in general within our kind of Greco-Roman Israelite monotheistic traditions. So that has to be impossible. So then who's right? And the answer is actually quite simple. If you speak to a theologian, the answer is, well, we're right. Whoever the we are, we're right. But that really is a function of history, because there were two religious traditions. They couldn't both be right. So there was a kind of zero-sum relationship, assumption, human assumption, of a zero-sum relationship. There wasn't, probably some people might have transcended that tendency, but not for the most part. So somebody's right and somebody's wrong. But guess what happens 400 or 500 years later? Islam emerges into history, a new revelation, same God, different revelation, some ways similar to New Testament, Old Testament, some ways different. But Islam actually has a different perspective. Instead of a kind of fulfillment of an earlier revelation that is no longer relevant in and of itself, but only can be fulfilled through the new revelation, the Islamic perspective is we're better, but we don't claim that we're the only show in town that's really true. And you may not see this today because the reactionary forces sort of have the ear of the media today, but Islam is a religious tradition, and it's very clearly articulated in the Quran, states that there are different forms of monotheism, that God gave revelation to all peoples in God's great wisdom and great humanity, or morality, and God gave each community a revelation in its own language and its own cultural language. And they're all different from one another, but the essential message is the same, and that is live as a moral, ethical person with justice, and you must believe in one God. There's one God, one truth, but there are different ways to get to it. And that actually is an Islamic perspective, although we don't hear it much today. And that, I think, also is an accident of history. In other words, if Islam was the second religion and Christianity was the third, Christianity probably would have been more open too, because it was no longer that kind of zero-sum relationship, that competitive relationship over who does mom like best, which one of us, right? So I hope that's kind of giving you something to chew on. Thank you very much. It's been very nice.
I think Reuven proved something. I almost teared up when you started to talk about our time together in Jerusalem, which was the culmination of a lot of thought and a lot of give and take. And I was trying to think how I would answer that question. And it simply doesn't go in the direction of who was more right or anything like that. It was like being in the sense of the presence of God in a much more striking way than I had experienced in other settings. It was very, very powerful. Several things, just again, this is coming out. Reuben is one of the editors and contributor, as I was to this. This is a long project, but this should be out, what did they say, like July or something like that. It should be Oxford University Press. Here's one I got today. It's a copy of that Oxford is using for a book. It's not quite as elegant as this one, but it's on Catholic high schools facing the new realities. And it's a book that I wrote that's going to be coming out. Coming out in 2 weeks is The Crisis of Authority in Catholic Modernity. This is edited by two first-rate scholars, one who was the former president of Williams College and a board member of our institute, an intellectual historian, Catholic, and the other, that's Francis Oakley. The other, Michael Lacey, was the head of the Woodrow Wilson Institute in Washington, D.C. for 20 years, directing particularly the American Studies program. These two people brought together a number of really serious scholars, not the usual suspects, to try to deal with the challenge that the Catholic Church is facing itself today in terms of teaching authority, relationship of bishop to laity, and so on and so forth. It cries out for honest, open discussion. And the Institute stands for that. We want competent people. We don't want nuts on the right or the left. We want first-rate people to think about seriously the subject. And Reuben is certainly part of that, and we love him for that.
What's the name of that one again, Jim?
It's going to be Heft Goes to Rome. No, this is called, this is The Crisis of Authority, The Crisis of Authority in Catholic Modernity. Modernity being our own times is what it means. I might also mention one of Reuben's really interesting books, which you can purchase here, Who Are the Real Chosen People? And then you open it up and it says real clearly, only the Jews. No, it's a blank page, I'm kidding. But who are the real chosen people? I encourage you, I hope you found his thoughts stimulating. The last thing I want to mention is the last lecture in our series this spring. This is a very good friend of both Reuben and mine. He wasn't part of this interreligious dialogue. His name is Donald Miller, an extremely gifted professor here at the University of Southern California, a sociologist of religion, who with his wife over the last decade have at least once a year gone back to Rwanda and have worked with the survivors, many of whom live next door to people they know killed their parents, trying to deal with the issue of reconciliation. He will also bring video clips and other things that he's been dealing with, but it's an extraordinary story that I think fits wonderfully. That's going to be Tuesday, April the 5th, not here, though this is really nice, isn't it?
Yes.
Lovely place. It's going to be in the Davidson Center where we've had our lectures before, at the same time at 5 p.m. Tuesday the 5th. So, thank you very much. There's time if you want to mix a little bit with Reuben. Check out his books. Thank you for coming.
Okay.